My name is Helen Ashworth, 42 years old, and for the past 16 years I have taught history at St. Margaret's Comprehensive School in North London. I am the kind of teacher most students barely notice: quiet, methodical, always prepared, but never the one who wins popularity contests, or gets invited to staff parties. Until last September, I believed I was content with my unremarkable life. I had my small terraced house in Finchley, my garden, where I grew vegetables, and my books that kept me company in the evenings. I never married, never had children, and told myself I preferred the simplicity of being alone. Then Marcus Steele arrived as our new headmaster, and everything changed, not because he noticed me romantically, quite the opposite, but because he decided I was a problem that needed solving. Marcus was everything the school board had been looking for. Young, dynamic, with a master's in business administration and revolutionary ideas about educational reform. He came from a prestigious private school in Hampstead, where he had supposedly transformed academic results. From his first staff meeting, IT was clear. He viewed most of us as obstacles to progress. He spoke about modernizing the curriculum, embracing technology, and eliminating what he called dead wood from the teaching staff. I knew immediately I was part of the dead wood he wanted to clear. The signs were subtle at first. My classroom was moved to the oldest building, where the heating barely worked. My budget for teaching materials was cut, while other departments received increases, and my requests for professional development courses were consistently denied. More concerning was the way Marcus began documenting every minor issue with my teaching methods. He would arrive unannounced, 4 observations always, during my most challenging classes with the Year 9 students who tested every teacher's patience. His reports painted me as inflexible, outdated, and resistant to change. He criticized my use of traditional teaching methods, despite the fact that my students consistently performed well on their examinations. What bothered me most was how he treated the other long-serving teachers, particularly Susan Wright, who had taught mathematics for 25 years. Marcus publicly questioned her methods in staff meetings and made snide comments about teachers who couldn't adapt to modern standards. Within 6 months, 3 experienced teachers had taken early retirement rather than endure Marcus' constant criticism. They were replaced by young graduates who accepted lower salaries and unquestioningly implemented his educational theories. I realized I was watching a systematic purge designed to remove anyone who might challenge his authority or question his methods. By Christmas, it became clear that Marcus had a specific strategy for forcing out unwanted staff. He would identify teachers he considered problematic, then create documentation that justified disciplinary action. His favorite tactic was to schedule observations when he knew teachers would struggle. Susan Wright was observed during her most difficult class immediately after lunch, when the students were restless and her usual excellent classroom management skills were overwhelmed by deliberate disruptions. The observation report criticized her inability to maintain discipline and suggested she was losing her effectiveness as an educator. Susan was devastated. She had never received negative feedback in her entire career. My turn came in January. Marcus scheduled an observation during my Year 9 lesson on the Industrial Revolution. He arrived 15 minutes late, disrupting the flow of the class, then sat in the back, making obvious notes, while shaking his head disapprovingly. The students sensed the tension and began acting up, knowing their behavior would reflect poorly on me. Marcus made nitrogen monoxide effort to help maintain order, simply documented every moment of disruption. His report was scathing. I described my teaching as uninspired, outdated, and ineffective. He recommended immediate improvement measures, including mandatory training in classroom management and modern pedagogical methods. What infuriated me was the dishonesty of it all. My students genuinely enjoyed history class. Their exam results were consistently above average, and many went on to study history at university level, but Marcus' observation painted me as a failure. I began to suspect there was more to his agenda than simple educational reform. The teachers he was targeting were all experienced professionals who commanded higher salaries. By replacing US with younger, cheaper staff, he could significantly reduce the school's budget. More troubling was his relationship with the governing body. He had convinced them that dramatic changes were necessary to improve the school's performance, despite the fact that our results had been steadily improving for years under the previous headmaster. I decided to investigate Marcus's background more thoroughly. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about our new headmaster. During the February half-term, I used my access to the school library computers to research Marcus' previous position at Hampstead Collegiate School. What I found was disturbing. The improvements he claimed to have made were largely fabricated. The school's exam results had indeed improved, but that was due to increasingly selective admissions policies rather than better teaching. More damaging were the reports I found in local newspapers about his departure from Hampstead. Several experienced teachers had filed complaints about unfair treatment and constructive dismissal of the school. Had settled out of court, but the stories described exactly the same patterns I was witnessing at St. Margaret's. One article mentioned a teacher named James Patterson who had been forced into early retirement after 30 years of exemplary service. I managed to contact him through the teachers' union. James agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Hampstead. His story was heartbreaking. Familiar Marcus had targeted him for removal using the same tactics he was now employing against us. He destroyed my reputation, James told me, questioned my competence in front of colleagues and students, made my life so miserable that early retirement seemed like the only escape. James provided me with copies of correspondence he had kept, including emails from other teachers who had been similarly treated at Hampstead. The pattern was identical. Experienced teachers were systematically harassed until they resigned or retired. What shocked me most was learning that Marcus had done this at 2 previous schools. Before Hampstead, he was essentially a professional bully who specialized in forcing out long-serving staff to reduce salary costs while presenting himself as an educational reformer. Armed with this information, I contacted the other teachers at St. Margaret's who were being targeted. Susan Wright agreed to meet, as did David Ellis from the English department and Margaret Collins from science. Our secret meetings became a form of therapy as we shared our experiences and realized we were all facing the same systematic harassment. Marcus was using identical tactics against each of U.S. negative observations, impossible performance targets, and constant criticism. Susan had kept detailed records of every interaction with Marcus, including emails, observation reports, and notes from meetings. Her organizational skills proved invaluable as we built our case. David contributed testimony from students who had approached Kim privately to complain about the way Marcus spoke to certain teachers. Several Year 11 students had noticed the unfair treatment and were disturbed by it. Margaret provided financial documentation showing how the school budget had been restructured since Marcus' arrival. Money that had previously funded teacher development and classroom resources was being diverted to expensive consultancy contracts with firms that had connections to Marcus. We discovered that Marcus was receiving kickbacks from educational consultants who were being hired to provide training that could have been delivered more cheaply by existing staff. The financial corruption added another dimension to our complaint. I contacted the National Union of Teachers, who assigned a representative named Carol Genkins to our case. Carol had dealt with similar situations and immediately recognized the patterns we described. She helped us compile a comprehensive dossier documenting Marcus' behavior and its impact on staff morale and student education. The file included evidence from his previous school's testimony from affected teachers and documentation of the financial irregularity. Carol also connected us with an employment lawyer who specialized in educational disputes. He confirmed that we had strong grounds for legal action, but recommended trying to resolve the matter through the school's governing body first. The challenge was that Marcus had carefully cultivated relationships with key governors. They believed his narrative about modernizing the school and removing ineffective teachers. We needed to present our evidence in a way that would make them question their support for his methods. The opportunity came when the governing body scheduled a meeting to review the school's progress. Under Marcus' leadership, he had prepared a glowing report about improved efficiency and staff renewal. Carol arranged for us to address the governors directly, presenting our evidence as a formal complaint about Marcus' conduct as headmaster. The governors were initially resistant, clearly uncomfortable with criticizing someone they had recently appointed. Marcus tried to dismiss our complaints as the grumbling of disgruntled employees who couldn't adapt to change, but our documentation was too comprehensive to ignore. The evidence from his previous schools was particularly damaging. The governors realized they had been misled about his track record and that the pattern of behavior we described had occurred multiple times before. More concerning were the financial irregularities. The governing body took their fiduciary responsibilities seriously, and the evidence of kickbacks from consultancy contracts demanded investigation. Several parents had also submitted complaints about the declining morale among teaching staff and its impact on their children's education. Students had noticed when good teachers were being treated unfairly. The chair of governors, Mrs. Patricia Hamilton, announced that an independent investigation would be conducted into the allegations. Marcus would be suspended on full pay pending the outcome. Marcus's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of welcoming the opportunity to clear his name, he became defensive and aggressive, threatening legal action against anyone who repeated the allegations. His behavior during the meeting convinced several previously supportive governors that our concerns were legitimate. The independent investigation was conducted by a retired headmaster with expertise in educational management. He interviewed current and former staff, reviewed documentation, and examined the financial records. Within 2 weeks, he had uncovered evidence that went far beyond our original complaints. Marcus had been systematically falsifying performance data to make his impact appear more positive than it actually was. The improved efficiency, he claimed, was simply the result of cutting essential services and reducing support for struggling students. The cost savings came at the expense of educational quality. More damaging was the discovery that Marcus had been planning to sell part of the school grounds to a property developer. The deal would have provided him with a substantial personal commission while reducing the school's recreational facilities. The investigator also found evidence that Marcus had been sharing confidential information about teachers with the consultancy firms he was hiring, creating training programs designed to target specific individuals for removal. The final report was damning. IT recommended immediate dismissal for gross misconduct and suggested that the matter be referred to the Department for Education for possible sanctions against his teaching qualifications. The governing body voted unanimously to terminate Marcus's contract. Without notice, he was banned from the school premises, and all his administrative privileges were revoked. More satisfying was the decision to reverse all the negative performance reviews he had conducted. The governors acknowledged that these had been part of a systematic campaign of harassment rather than legitimate educational assessments. With Marcus gone, the atmosphere at St. Margaret's changed dramatically. The deputy head, who had been intimidated into silence, Marcus Rain, took over as acting headmaster and immediately began reversing the most damaging policies. The consultation contracts were cancelled, saving the school thousands of pounds that were redirected into classroom resources and teacher development. The budget for educational materials was restored to previous levels. Most importantly, the culture of fear that Marcus had created began to dissipate. Teachers started collaborating again, sharing ideas, and supporting each other rather than worrying about being reported for minor infractions. Susan Wright returned to her usual excellent form in the classroom, her confidence restored now that she wasn't under constant scrutiny. David Ellis began running the Creative Writing Club again, something he had stopped during Marcus' tenure for fear of criticism. The students noticed the change immediately. Several approached me to say how much happier their teachers seemed and how the atmosphere in the school had improved. I found myself enjoying teaching again for the first time in months, without the constant stress of expecting criticism. Every decision, I could focus on what I did best, helping students understand and appreciate history. The union representative, Carol Gankins, visited to check on our well. She was impressed by how quickly the school had recovered and used our case as an example in her training seminars about workplace bullying. Marcus attempted to fight his dismissal through an employment tribunal, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. His case was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay the school's legal costs. More satisfying was learning that the Department for Education had launched their own investigation into his conduct at previous schools. The pattern of behavior we had documented was being recognized as a systematic abuse of authority. Several teachers from his former schools came forward with additional evidence, including financial records that suggested he had been receiving kickbacks for years. The experience of fighting Marcus changed me in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for something important, and one IT gave me a confidence I had never possessed before. I started speaking up more in staff meetings, sharing ideas for curriculum development, and volunteering for committees I had previously avoided. My colleagues began to see me differently, as someone with valuable contributions rather than just a quiet presence. The acting headmaster asked me to lead a working group on improving history teaching across the school. I developed programs that helped younger teachers learn from experienced colleagues rather than seeing them as obstacles to progress. Outside school, I joined the local historical society and began giving talks. about local history to community groups, I discovered I had a talent for public speaking that had been suppressed by years of believing I was too ordinary to have anything interesting to say. The vegetable garden behind my house expanded into a small urban farm. I started selling surplus produce at the local farmers market and found unexpected joy in chatting with customers about gardening techniques. One of those customers was Robert Hartley, a recently retired librarian who shared my interest in local history. We began collaborating on a project to document the history of our neighborhood, interviewing elderly residents and collecting photographs. What started as an academic exercise gradually became something more personal. Robert and I discovered we enjoyed each other's company both professionally and socially. For the first time in my life, I found myself in a relationship that felt natural and comfortable. Robert appreciated my quiet intelligence without trying to change me. He encouraged my new confidence without making me feel I had been inadequate before. After 6 months of acting leadership, the governing body began the process of recruiting a permanent headmaster. This time, they were more careful about checking references and understanding candidates' previous experiences. They asked for input from the teaching staff about what qualities we wanted in a new leader. The consensus was clear: we wanted someone who valued experience, encouraged collaboration, and understood that good education came from supporting teachers rather than intimidating them. The successful candidate was Jennifer Matthews, a deputy head from a successful comprehensive school in Birmingham. She had 20 years of experience in education and a reputation for building strong teams. From her first staff meeting, it was clear that Jennifer had a completely different approach from Marcus. She listened to teachers' concerns, asked for our input on school policies, and treated us as professional colleagues rather than subordinates to be managed. She scheduled one-to-one meetings with all staff members to understand our strengths and concerns. When she met with me, she had clearly done her homework about the Marcus situation. "I understand you've been through a difficult time," she said, "but I hope you know that your experience and dedication are valued here. I want to work with you to ensure nothing like that happens again." Jennifer introduced new policies that protected teachers from unfair treatment, including transparent procedures for performance evaluation and multiple perspectives on any disciplinary actions. She also restored the collaborative culture that had existed before Marcus's arrival. Experienced teachers were paired with newer staff for mentoring programs, and everyone was encouraged to share best practices. The school began to thrive in ways that Marcus' aggressive modernization had never achieved. Exam results improved because teachers felt supported and students responded to the more positive atmosphere. 2 years after Marcus' departure, I received an unexpected phone call from James Patterson, the teacher from Hampstead who had first told me about Marcus' previous behavior. "Helen," he said, "I've just heard that Marcus has been arrested for fraud." The police investigation into the consultancy kickbacks uncovered a much larger pattern of corruption. It turned out that Marcus had been running similar schemes at all his previous schools, using his position to award contracts to companies that paid him substantial commissions. The amounts involved were in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. More satisfying was learning that several of the teachers he had forced into early retirement were being offered compensation by their former schools. The legal case had established that they had been victims of systematic harassment. James himself had been approached by his old school with an offer to return on a consultancy basis to help train younger mathematics teachers. He was thrilled to have his professional reputation restored. The news of Marcus's arrest spread quickly through the education community. Several articles appeared in teaching journals about the importance of protecting experienced staff from bullying disguised as modernization. I was interviewed for one of these articles about the impact of workplace bullying on teacher morale and student outcomes. Speaking publicly about the experience was therapeutic, and I hope it helped other teachers who might be facing similar situations. The article led to invitations to speak at education conferences about creating supportive school environments. I discovered I had valuable insights to share about maintaining professional standards while fostering collaboration. At St. Margaret's, my role continued to evolve. Jennifer appointed me as head of professional development, with responsibility for supporting both new and experienced teachers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had seen me as deadwood to be cleared, while Jennifer saw me as a valuable resource to be utilized. My relationship with Robert deepened into something I had never expected to experience. He proposed last summer in my vegetable garden surrounded by the tomatoes and courgettes we had planted together. The wedding was small and simple, held in the school hall, with my colleagues and Robert's friends from the library service. Jennifer gave a speech about the importance of supporting people to become their best selves, rather than trying to force them into predetermined molds. Looking back, I realized that Marcus' bullying inadvertently gave me the greatest gift of my life. It forced me to find courage I didn't know I possessed, and to discover strengths I had never recognized. The quiet, unassuming teacher who had accepted unfair treatment without complaint was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't plotting elaborate schemes or seeking dramatic confrontations. It's simply refusing to let bullies define who you are and building a life that proves their judgment wrong. Marcus saw me as weak and disposable, but I turned out to be stronger and more valuable than he ever imagined. That truth was the most satisfying victory of all.